So hi everyone, a very warm welcome to you all. My name is Chris Borg, Policy Manager at NELC. It's my pleasure to be sharing today's event on strengthening local connections. Firstly, I'd like to quickly run through a few housekeeping announcements, some of which are shown on the slide on the screen. Do use the Q&A function on Zoom there throughout the event to put your questions to our speakers, and the chat function to interact with your fellow delegates and to share any information or links. If you require any technical support, do please again post any of those in the chat. And my NELC colleague Liv, who always does a great job Zoom hosting these events, will try our best to help. Quick couple of points about the closed caption feature, i.e. subtitles, which can be accessed by all attendees at any time during today's event. For desktop or laptop users, to turn on closed captions, please select Show Captions. The button will be labelled CC. If the button is not visible, please select the three dots at the bottom right corner of the screen. Then please select Captions, and after that you'll be prompted to click Show Captions, so please select this option. If you are using a mobile device or tablet, please scroll across the menu on the bottom of your screen and again select Captions. You'll then be needing to click Show Captions. Nearing the end of this now, once the captions are on, you can access a live transcription of the event. And if you have selected the closed caption feature, please use the reactions feature, which is the next button on the right of the closed caption feature, by clicking yes, the green emoji with a tick to show us that the closed caption are working at your end. Again, if you're experiencing any technical difficulties to do with closed captions or anything else, post that in the chat, and we'll try and sort that out before 1:15 when the event ends. After the event, we'll send the presentation slides if there have been any use today, or PDFs or any chat or links which speakers would like to share with you or you'd like to see. And we'll also be inviting your feedback on today's event. So please do look out for the feedback form, which will pop up on your screens just as you're about to leave the webinar. So, that will pop up. Do spend 2 minutes. It's like gold to us. It really does help us to try and improve these events. Event on event, and we can try and make them better for you in future and more interactive, whatever, and moving forwards. Okay, next slide, please, Liv. So just again to thank our sponsors, who are Clear, CCLA and Blashir Illuminations, for their extensive support for today's NELC online event and all others moving forward this financial year. Couldn't do it without them. Next slide, please, Liv. Just a bit about our session today then, and speakers. So as we welcome a newly elected government, or it seems like a newly elected government still, parish and town councils continue to face complex and pressing challenges at the grassroots level. Despite the shifting political landscape, strong leadership and effective community engagement remain more critical than ever, and that is true. Parish and town councils are at the heart of their communities, often making difficult decisions impacting residents' daily lives. Today's event is a unique opportunity to learn from distinguished speakers who are community engagement experts, and they're going to show and share with you valuable insights and provide practical strategies and actionable advice on how local councils can foster positive relationships with their and your communities. So today you'll gain hopefully a deeper understanding of how to engage residents constructively, build trust and create solutions that address local issues while navigating the complexities of sometimes, let's be honest, unpopular decisions. So, without further ado, at 4 minutes past 12, I'm thrilled to be joined today by our panel of speakers, who are Grace Pollard, who is Head of Policy and Insights at New Local, and Stephen Heels, Senior Advisor in the leadership team at the Local Government Association. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Stephen to kick us off. Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for inviting me today. So as Chris said, I'm Senior Advisor for Leadership at the Local Government Association. We are the voice of local government, and we provide a range of improvement services to the sector. I particularly work in the team that provides a whole life cycle training and development service to officers and members in local government, and we work closely in partnership with NELC on opportunities relating to parishes and town councils. Just a bit about me. I'm on secondment from the West Midlands Combined Authority for 12 months at the Local Government Association, and I principally worked on devolution of local economic development funding and services in my more recent career. and I have a wider background in transformation and change in local government. And if you're trying to make change happen in local government, engagement and community involvement is always key, because to truly achieve that change, you must involve the people you're aiming to make that change for. And I remember my first experience in local government. My very first project was working on community library services, where we were engaging with community groups, parishes and towns to explore where we could hand over some of those library assets to communities where the council might otherwise need to close them. And I learned a huge amount from that, and that's, I've carried it with me throughout my career. The importance of those anchor assets in communities like libraries, the fact that there's not a one-size-fits-all. Every community is truly distinct, but everyone does have something to offer, and in different ways, different communities responded to that work. So that was just a bit about me and who I am. Today, I'm principally going to be drawing on the work of the Local Government Association's workbook on neighbourhood and community engagement. As Chris said, we'll share the link for that, so colleagues can engage in that after this call as well. So the first, I just wanted to talk about why local matters. So you are part of England's 10,000 parish and town councils, the community tier of local government. And we say, as in the guide, the most important role for councillors is mixing, fixing in the communities you represent. And I think that's quite a neat phrase, mixing and fixing. As I said, every community is distinct, and in practice, people decide their communities. Top-down boundaries don't always work, and I'm sure we can all resonate with examples of where there've been top-down efforts from bureaucrats to design community interventions that didn't reflect what's really happening on the ground. And we absolutely recognise that at an LGA, that communities are bottom up and driven from bottom up action and convening. And it's only at the local level that, you know, those challenges from social housing, crime, deprivation, antisocial behaviour, but also unlocking those opportunities around economic development and jobs and skills and transport and all those other things can really be best understood and addressed. And I say I've worked quite a lot on devolution, and for me, it's at the community level where devolution becomes real for me. And it would be remiss of me not just to remark on the current context in local government. So the current government is pursuing local government reform and devolution, but absolutely parish and town councils are set to continue to have a really clear role as part of the local government family. You will remain the pulse check for those community issues and opportunities, and one may see that role only strengthening in those areas where we maybe move into larger unitary authorities. So, you know, really important, really valuable work you do, and you've got a really distinctive role to in terms of community leadership. And I think despite all the headwinds and noise that's happening in the wider sector, I certainly feel confident that parishes and towns are going to continue to grow and strengthen what they do. The next bit I wanted to touch on was the tenets of community leadership. So we say that there's two principal aspects to this. One is representation and the other one is convening. So on representation, that your role as parish and town councils to represent the views of your local people and local communities. And you can speak with absolute confidence and credibility on behalf of many of those community issues that can't be as easily understood from Whitehall or even County Hall. Also to support those community calls for help and enabling voices to be listened to that might not otherwise need to be, and also understanding if local services are actually working on the ground and where those really granular challenges might lie. So there's a really important representative role you play for your communities. And then there's the convening role. And I was reflecting on this a little bit ahead of this talk, and so I have some experience of working with mayors and combined authorities, and I think there's an analogy there in maybe the role of a parish or town councillor and a mayor, which, you know, may be elite, but mayors have very little powers in practice, but their superpower is their convening power. So Andy Burnham in Greater Manchester did, just as an example, loads of really great work on homelessness and a bed every night. had no power or formal role in that agenda, but he convened all those actors in Greater Manchester to come around this really thorny issue and get the NHS, councils, community groups all pulling in the same direction. And so I think that convening role, that kind of soft convening bit, is kind of your superpower too. So that role in promoting participation in democracy in all its different forms, and that convening different partners that need to come together around the problems and opportunities you see. So community leadership, representation, and convening. I then wanted to just talk about some of the levers you can draw on as parish and town councils. This isn't aimed to be extensive, but just so everyone's aware of these. There is the Localism Act, which was launched in 2011. And that gives you a range of powers you can draw on if you perhaps, particularly when and where you want to take action on a community issue or opportunity. So there's the general power of competence, which many parish and town councils are using in practice. So where you are 2/3 elected and have a qualified clerk and have passed a resolution, that's something you can draw on, and councils have used that to give just some examples of grants to particular groups that they might not otherwise be sure how to do, to take over the running of a community asset, or to set up a new service that could deliver, say, a local bus service or something like that. So the general power of competence is definitely something being aware of. I mean, my advice would be learn from your peers, your other parishes and towns, how they use that in practice. But if you want to do something and you can't see how to get it done, it's definitely worth taking the time to learn about that and drawing on it. There's also the community right to challenge, where alternative service providers such as community interest groups can submit expressions of interest to run services, and potentially then your principal council could trigger a procurement there. So if something just isn't being delivered in the best way you think it could, a community interest group or other model could come together, you have that option and that right to express an interest, to say we could do that, we could take over that. And the community right to bid, again, and parish and town councils, community groups can prepare bids to purchase listed community assets that the principal local authority may be wishing to dispose of. And for those of you that are in geographies that are pursuing local government reform, that might be quite a lively opportunity or point at the moment. And then neighbourhood plans as well. So over 3,000 communities have begun the neighbourhood planning process. Just over 40% have been designated. And I did some research as well, because there's obviously changes from the government around the planning regime, and a bigger focus on spatial plans at that mayoral combined authority level where they exist. But neighbourhood plans, the government currently remains very committed to those. And the line is that they will work in synergy with the wider spatial plans. So absolutely encourage you to work with your principal authorities and pursue neighbourhood plans, again, as another lever under the Localism Act. So that's one thing bearing in mind. The other one, which is very recent, is the government's Plan for Neighbourhoods prospectus, which was launched in March last month. So this is the successor to the government's Towns Fund that people may be more familiar with under the previous government. And the reason I particularly highlight this is because it has a really strong emphasis on community engagement. And so the government's headline in their prospectus, which is available online, is that local change is best driven by those with the biggest stake. And I think it would be hard to argue that parish and town councils don't fit that brief. At the moment, there are 75 places across the country that are identified. One of the 75 is a town council, Royal Sutton Coalfield, and they are the lead authority for developing their priorities under the Plan for Neighbourhoods regime. And as I said, community engagement is a big focus of this. So parishes and towns, even where you may not be the lead authority, if you are in one of the other 74 areas that have been selected, you absolutely have a stake and a right to be around the table in those conversations. So it might be worth looking if you are in one of those areas. And then linked to that, there may well be new areas in the future. So again, by engaging productively with your principal council in your area, there might be an opportunity to help shape some of the early thinking around the priorities to become a potential plan for neighbourhoods area. So that's very new policy from the government. That'll obviously provide investment and focus around regeneration and other community opportunities. But my assessment is that that's likely to grow as a programme over the coming years of this government, and definitely worth understanding and being alive to. The last point I was going to talk about today before I hand over to Grace is just some in practice points. So I've aimed there to talk a bit about the kind of theory, if you will, and some tools and levers you have to make things happen for your communities in practice. But I say there are some very practical things we would suggest you want to think about if and when and how you engage communities in making decisions and making things happen. I think, as I've tried to get across today, be confident in what you know. You're specially placed to understand your neighbourhoods and communities, and that's a superpower for you. We would say foster effective working relationships with your principal authority. Find that common cause, because in local government we'll achieve more by working together. We know, context is everything in that space, but generally parishes and towns working constructively with their principal authorities will achieve goodness for their communities. And create the conditions for engagement and involvement. Goes back to that point about convening. You don't have to have all the answers, but what you can do is facilitate the environments that help you get to those answers and help your communities and residents feel like they've really shaped making something happen that makes a difference. A pointer that you can use the public space of your meetings creatively. It doesn't always have to be a town hall question and answer kind of format. As long as your chair's in agreement, you can do workshops, world cafes, or other creative means of community engagement. And so that's something to think about in your public meetings, about how you might create creative ways for communities and residents to get involved in helping shape something happen. Environments matter, so think about the spaces you use, make sure they're inclusive and comfortable, and I'm sure you do draw on the community assets you have that are local for people to access. Inclusivity is always really important, so different people, different communities, you'll find different levels of social capital, and account for this. Not everyone may have as much time or energy to be involved in something, but they would still like to have a say. So that links to a point about kind of be clear. Are you consulting? Are you co-designing, or maybe something in the middle? And I think those terms of engagement are really important to consider at the outset of any engagement. Are we asking for opinions, and insights, but we're going to have to make some potentially tough decisions at the end of that, and that's fine, but have an inclusive consultation process to help inform that. Or actually, is there a space for genuine co-design where people with lived experience can come forwards and help co-create the solution and the answer? So I think really hard about that at the outset is a message there. I think about how communities can shape your funding decisions. So there's models such as participatory budgeting, which Grace might touch on a little bit, which have been used to really great effect in many parish and town council environments, as well as internationally. And develop an engagement plan. It sounds simple, but a really good thing we see many parish and town councils do is develop a simple plan that says, this is how we will engage you on these decisions, this is when we'll do it, this is what you can expect from us. And that evergreen message of we're always here at the end of a telephone or an email, or happy to meet to discuss something too. And then the last point just on those practice points is there are a range of specialist engagement organisations you can draw on. If some of this is new to you or you don't have the capacity, then we would recommend thinking about working with an expert community engagement organisation, which is probably a really nice point for me to hand over to Grace, who works at New Local and is one of such organisations.
Fantastic. Thanks, Stephen. Welcome, Grace. Over to you.
Thank you, and thanks so much, Stephen, for that lovely segue. So yeah, just before I dive in, and I'm going to really focus on building on some of the practice side that Stephen's talked about, I thought it was just helpful just to introduce New Local if you're not familiar with us. So we are an independent think tank and also a network of councils. Our focus is on community power. And by that, we mean the idea that people should have more say over the places they live and the services that they use. So that's something that's going to feel very sort of live and meaningful to lots of people here, I would imagine. So in practice, a lot of our work focuses on how councils and other place partners can work with and alongside communities to deliver more responsive, prevention-focused public services and better outcomes for people and places. This means we have a really big focus on how councils involve people and communities in decision-making processes, both from like formal deliberation processes that might be happening with principal authorities might be using like citizens' assemblies and really large-scale processes like that, but also through to much more like informal and ongoing community engagement, what that means for officers, what that means for councillors in terms of their role and day-to-day engagement with communities. So that whole spectrum is something that we really invite councils to think about. In terms of what we do as an organisation, we are a think tank, so we do research and policy across this idea of community power. We're also a network of around 50 councils and other organisations with a really strong focus on peer learning around community power, community engagement, and public service reform. We run events, including our flagship event, Stronger Things, which brings together lots of people working across local government, other public services, community groups, to talk about how we make places better, how we work with our communities to do that. And we also, as Stephen's already alluded to, we deliver practice work. So we work directly in places with councils and with other partners to work with them to think about how they engage with and work with their communities around identifying strategic challenges, setting strategies, and also into that sort of service design and delivery space as well. And then just briefly to touch on my role, I am the head of policy and insights at New Local. I focus on understanding, learning and insight from what's happening in places, developing ways to share that learning across local government, and then identifying the wider policy conditions that can support more community-centred, relational and preventative ways of working in places. So I think Stephen has really set up this conversation brilliantly in terms of some of that background context. And so really, and then starting to draw out some of these practice insights as well. And so much of what you were saying, Stephen, really resonates, particularly that point on that convening power. I think that's really powerful. I also have a background of working at GLA, so at that sort of regional level where, yeah, like absolutely that the power of mayors to convene, but there's a really interesting read across at a kind of hyper-local level to how town and parish councils have that really important role in that. So when I was asked to speak here, I was reflecting a little bit on this, and so yeah, I think the first thing to say up front is that parish and town councils, we know through our work when we engage with them, that you're like incredibly well placed to understand those nuances, the granular context of what's really happening in communities, how that really affects people's experiences and their views on key local challenges, priorities and services. So I think, as Stephen said, like really recognising that as your superpower as well. And then I think the other thing I'd say is, while we spend a lot of our time working potentially with principal authorities who are maybe doing much larger scale engagement pieces, I think it's just back to that point of recognising that engagement is something that can flow through all tiers of what government is doing. It flows through people's roles. And I mean, like, for you as town and parish councils, this is like at your core of your being in terms of how you work. So I think recognising that strength and not only thinking about this in terms of really big set piece engagement processes, but as Stephen said, that, you know, do you have a plan in place? How are you using your meetings? How are you thinking about your day-to-day interactions with your communities? So I think not being put off that this is just about, we hear a lot about some of those really big set piece things, be that citizens' assemblies, really large scale, often expensive deliberation processes. There's an awful lot, I would say, in between that, when it comes to good community engagement. So I just wanted to draw out some learning and reflections from our network, from the work that we're involved with, which I think speak across all scales in terms of good community engagement. I tried to distill that down into 4 question reflection areas that hopefully just set us up really well to go into the Q&A for the second part of the discussion. So these are really meant as a little bit of a starter to get us thinking, a little bit of a provocation. I would imagine you're doing lots of these things already. Lots of this will sound really familiar, but hopefully this just like is a starting point for us to have a bit of a conversation in the Q&A. So with that in mind, the first question is one that I've been thinking about a lot recently, which is who is framing the conversation? So often when we are working with councils, we're thinking about what you need to engage community members on specific topics, on specific issues, what your priorities are, what your agenda is. And that's really valuable and important. And we know that communities should and want to have a say in that. But I think there's also something about reflecting where the spaces are for those more open conversations. We hear a lot where councils have tried more open approaches to having a conversation, what those ongoing conversations are, what those spaces and forums are for hearing what matters to people right now in the terms that it matters to them. Because sometimes I think that can be really surprising, because sometimes it's not the way we would frame the issue. And also sometimes it kind of reveals energy, really creative solutions to problems, ideas that you can be tapping into about how to improve outcomes in your place. That if you go in with a set framing, you might not hear that, because people will just answer the question that you pose. So I think there's something, and you really are the experts in the room about how you work and operate in your place, but there's something about asking that question of where are the opportunities to have those more open conversations? How could we be starting those? And then related to this, and Stephen touched on this as well, I think there's something about really being clear from good engagement practice about the parameters and the constraints that are being really clearly communicated. So if you are going into engaging on something specific, really making clear up front what the scope of that is, thinking about, do people have enough information to feel they can actively get involved in the conversation? And that might differ for different groups of people. So how are we thinking about the information that people need to like genuinely feel like they can be involved in the conversation? And I think that goes for both where you are engaging with your communities on something really specific, but also where you're having those more open conversations. And again, this is sort of bread and butter bit, where those things come up that you can't necessarily immediately do something about. How are we raising those issues? How are we making sure that information flows through, like that amazing source of knowledge that you've got because you're really close to communities? How's that flowing through to principal authorities, to other public services? So that I think a thing we hear often is that communities can feel like we're always engaging with them, but how are they feeling that something's happening from that? And that building of trust in that we share things, we share what's important to us, we share those problems, but then we also know and trust that things are going to be done about those problems. We know that that's not always in our gift. So how are we making sure that we're like responsive and have a plan in place about, look, these are the constraints of what we're doing right now, but this is also how we're using that information in a way that is, feeling like people have contributed constructively and something's going to come from that as well. And then I've touched on this a bit already, and Stephen's spoken to this importance around inclusivity, but I think that's really asking ourselves, who are we hearing from and who aren't we hearing from? And if you're clear who you're not hearing from, then you can start to plan about how to bring those people into the conversation. And I think Stephen's already touched on some really practical things to think about that. But it is asking those sets of questions about, where are we engaging people? What time of day are we engaging people? Online, in person, and then starting to map that against who you're hearing from and using that to sort of spot your gaps and to think, well, like, we aren't hearing from that group of people, and why is that? What could we change to make sure we can? Are our spaces really inclusive? Are these spaces that people can access? And then the other thing is, like, you don't need to go that alone. So thinking about who are the other local trusted partners when you know that you maybe do really have trouble accessing particular groups of people, like who are the trusted partners that you could be working with to improve your reach around that as well. And I think that's often where we have reflections from people that there are like amazing organisations, particularly in the voluntary and community sector, who can really help facilitate those conversations, who maybe will welcome you into their spaces. There's that sort of thinking about how we reach out into those networks, so that we hear from more people. And the thing I would really emphasise there is going out to people. Like, how can we do that as much as possible? And then the final thing I'm going to touch on before opening this up for wider conversation is that really crucial point about what happens next. So we hear a lot about consultation fatigue. Within 30 seconds of a conversation about engagement, that's what's going to come up as a really big concern, is like, oh, the people we're dealing with got consultation fatigue. So I think we really need to unpack that and be like, why do people feel that? And is that because they're tired of being asked, or is it because they feel like when they give information that they're not sure what happens next? So I think there are some really practical and small scale things we can do about that. And that is about how are we communicating what happens next after an engagement process or a conversation? What are the routes that you have to keep people informed in your local area? The community notice boards, online, like what are those routes? Just thinking really practically. And then how are we celebrating successes? When you've worked with community on something and something's gone really well, how are we like reflecting that back and celebrating that with people? But also, how are we going back and having honest conversations about what doesn't work, what we can't do, and like the wider parameters of that? So just, I think, how we shift from thinking about like one-off discrete engagement processes to those more ongoing conversations. And I think we might get into the conversation here, but there are lots of like practical tools to use. Stephen's mentioned World Cafes. We've thought about things like participatory budgeting. I'm actually off to speak to our members about that this afternoon. We've just been doing some learning on that. And there's a whole host of tools out there. And I would really encourage you to look to organisations that really specialise in like talking about these approaches, supporting with these approaches. There's places like Involve that have lots of really practical information on their website about different engagement approaches. At New Local, we've got lots of case studies on our website, sort of real world experiences of how to do this stuff. So there's loads out there. So I'd really invite you to look creatively at all of those different tools that you could be using, but also don't feel overwhelmed by the tools and methods. Ultimately, it's about how to have those ongoing conversations, using those tools and methods where appropriate, but also I think, as Stephen and I both kind of tried to highlight today, having those really good underlying principles that guide all of that. I think those are as important as the methods. So I think really just what I would end on is recognizing that this is really, really challenging work. It's not easy. It comes with, the context that we're all operating in, the context of change that we're all operating in at the moment, which brings really exciting opportunities, but also inevitably challenges to it as we kind of work through that change. And also that we know that there are disagreements in communities, there are issues that are highly contentious or fraught, there are competing viewpoints. And I guess what I would say is, how can we all challenge ourselves that in that context, to lean in more to open and ongoing engagement rather than feel like we want to shy away from that engagement? And I think that is really hard, but town and parish councils are really incredibly well placed to do that. You understand that nuance, you're close to your places and to your people and communities. So how can we use these tools to help us lean in and have more open conversations rather than fear those conversations because those issues might feel difficult or contentious? And I think like that would be my kind of open challenge or conversation to start for the group today. Would be really interested to hear people's learning and reflections on that. So I think that's enough from me. And with that, I will hand back over to you, Chris.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Grace. That was outstanding. And again, thanks to Stephen's brilliant segue earlier on. We're running about 10 or 11 minutes early, and aware that you have to leave in about 20 minutes, just over 20 minutes, Grace. So what I'm going to now do is take questions from the Q&A box for both panelists. Please do continue to put your questions in there, and we will try and get through as many as possible. And questions and answers will take place until about 1:10. and Stephen and I, largely Stephen, will try to field them after Grace goes at about 5 to for the last 15 minutes or so. Just in terms of where to post your questions, there is a Q&A, as one of you has already found out, Martin's already found out. The Q&A box should be at the bottom of your screen there. Now, the way this works is that we try to obviously make the, allow the lion's share of time on these events for Q&A. And you'll want to try and relate the absolutely excellent sort of, concept you've heard from both of our great speakers today to your own local place, your own place shaping experience. Now, if we can try to keep the questions as short as possible and perhaps linked to the specific themes that, if possible, that is, that Stephen and Grace have touched on. So Grace is for brilliant concepts and Stephen's kind of paradigms as well. That'd be brilliant. Linked to your place, then you probably get the most out of it that way. One thing we've learned from previous events as well, if people can, people are more likely to get the questions asked if they don't make statements in the Q&A box. It's not, sometimes people do the same thing at conferences too. They stand up and they make statements, and then the questioners think it would, the speaker doesn't know what the question is. So the same is true of online events. We can try to just avoid that. And then I'll give you a minute or two to quickly do that in the Q&A. I can see your names there, and basically, I'm then happy to ask the most upvoted question. So you can also upvote a question if you want someone else to ask it, and then you'll see the thumbs up there as to whose questions are the most popular. Some of you are posting them in the chat. If you can try to post them in the Q&A, that'd be brilliant. At the moment, there's only one that I can see that I can readily ask. And then just vote for the other questions, and then we can just basically operate them in that way. So I think one of you guys mentioned this, so we'll go with Mike Kennedy's question, which is a very short one first. Can one of you explain what a World Cafe is, please? I think, was it you that alluded to that, Stephen, in your piece?
It was. Very happy to answer, and do Grace chime in from your experience as well. So a World Cafe is it's basically where you create an environment with a set of questions. So think like I did one last month actually on an event, and we had about 6 different questions, 6 little like tables that people can convene around, and what sits underneath it is for me is the empowerment point. I'm not kind of in control of a World Cafe. My participants, they're in control, they're in charge of this environment. And you kind of say that at the start, this is your space, your time. You go to whatever question or questions you care most about in this room. And if no one comes to question 6, that's fine. That tells me something. That's probably not that relevant or interesting for the people in this room. So it's kind of a method of letting go of control. You have questions with a facilitator. We used like big sheets of say A1 or whatever, big sheets of paper. We said, just write down your ideas as you're talking. It's a conversation. We're all equals talking about this topic. And then say every 15, 20 minutes, whatever's appropriate, you might say, okay, it'd be great if people could move on to a different question. It's also a really efficient way of getting lots and lots of rich feedback really quickly as well. Obviously needs a bit of work afterwards to reflect on it all. But that's what it is. I mean, there's a whole like formal method of it. I think there's a World Cafe community gathering in San Francisco every year. So there's a whole like pedagogy around it, but I'm certainly not a purist, and that's how I would describe World Cafes. It's about those creative conversations, letting go, we're all equals, go A1. But yeah, Grace, anything you may have done these before or?
No, I wouldn't have anything to build on there, and I probably see, similar to you, Stephen, would not be like rigidly adhering to the. There are others who will have real expertise on the absolute principles for it, but I think you've captured the overall spirit of what it's intended to do, Stephen, is really that space for those more open conversations and creative space. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, many of these have slightly jargonistic nomenclature, don't they? And maybe If they're popular in San Francisco, they may be named, the kind of world cafe that maybe Dirty Harry would go to or something like that, but maybe not that we're aware of, if you know what I mean, from a Clint Eastwood perspective. But actually, the concept remains: call them focus groups, call them what you will. It's that really getting to the marrow of a community or a community groups or parish councils, residents' views, taking those away, and as you said, Grace, actually, to retain the trust after such an event, making sure that there's ongoing feedback. It's not just something that finishes. I know political parties do this kind of like, typically within a year or 18 months of an election type thing. That's part of maybe earlier as part of a policy review type thing. But actually then, what happens with that type of, eventuality is, well, this is non-party political, but it's the same kind of concept. It's about constant communication, building trust, building relationships. And okay, well, where's this going? And if there is no response from the principal authority or from, in your experience, Stephen, combined authority of the mayor, whatever, irrespective of the powers that those organisations or individuals have, what's happening next? How can the barriers be removed or a blockage be dissolved? So really interesting that. Perhaps that does segue then into Carol's excellent question, which is, I'll give that to you, Grace, first, which is, what are some suggestions for improving engagement with principal authorities? The whole LGR Devo concept, which in what we would call 3-tier areas, but which Jim McMahon is calling 2-tier areas, because we include parishes as a layer of local government, so districts and then counties kind of above that, or in the same area. It doesn't always work tremendously well, because parishes are often, as you know, ignored and their views not taken seriously, or it's sometimes party political at larger town council level, vis-a-vis different party groupings on district councils and then the county, and it's almost like three's a crowd type thing. So regarding how to improve engagement, either as part of the whole devolution of the organisation process, or just anyway, whatever the outcomes are, because they're going to be mixed, aren't they? Grace, do you have any kind of broad suggestions as to how parishes can try to engage with their principal authority? I guess that's not directly linked to the event theme of community engagement, but actually, maybe the question is an add-on, like if there has been community engagement ongoing from a parish council about, say, a principal authority project, and the parish council is waiting to hear feedback from the principal authority based on that community engagement or focus group. What would be the ways of unblocking that, for example? I'm imagining that's potentially where Carol's coming from.
Yeah, sure. And I think there is a really nice link between today's focus and that conversation and Carol's question. I feel like, Stephen, you are probably going to be better placed on some of this than me, but I will give just a few reflections from some of our work at New Local, where we often are working with principal authorities who will be working alongside their town and parish councils, and also just some broader reflections in the context of devolution and LGR. I guess my first reflection would be, I think there's something about how town and parish councils really communicate their expertise of being really close to and engaged with their communities. And I think anything that you can be doing to demonstrate and communicate that expertise is incredibly valuable. We know that for principal authorities, there is a really big focus on how they are able to work at that really close scale with their communities. I think there's a big interest in neighbourhood working, both in councils but also in the NHS. So these are like big issues across public sector reform conversations at the moment. And I think that means there is a real opportunity there for town and parish councils to be demonstrating and communicating their expertise. So that would be my first, is to really play to your strengths. The other would be to probably reflect and understand how your principal authority positions their own community engagement work and their own community engagement strategies and plans, so that you can think about how you connect to and relate to those priorities. And then the third would be, I think it is, and I think, Chris, maybe you mentioned it at the start, it is just about understanding those areas where you've got a really clear shared priority and how you can work in a collaborative way on that through that lens of place, which we often talk about trying to be a little bit leaving your lanyards at the door in terms of the organisation that you're coming from, but how you can be thinking about how you as partners are working together on those issues in place. And I guess what I'd reflect on that is that sometimes really being able to surface community priorities is a good way. Moving away from organisational priorities to community priorities is a good way to kind of start to find common ground, to be on the same page as well. And the other is just being able to reflect to your principal authority that importance of that feedback loop with your communities. And so, as you say, Chris, in the example you're giving, if it feels like there is information that you are waiting for that you need to feed back to your communities, just being really clear that that is part of like your engagement plan about how you want to engage well with your communities. They will have their plans about how they want to engage well with their communities, so that it is really about ultimately that serving that feedback loop to your communities, I think would be some of my suggestions.
Brilliant, thanks. Now, the reason I selected this question was because, you know, there's something I wanted to tease out broadly as well from Stephen as well about combined authorities, because there's a whole other set of questions we could engage in about that within the prism of community engagement, as you rightly said, Grace. But no, brilliant. Thanks for that. It's fantastic. Stephen, anything to add to the points that Grace has expertly made there? I don't know whether you want to throw in any comments generally about combined authorities. I'll be honest, as part of this whole Devo LGR agenda, I'm not picking up, our county associations, I don't believe, picking up much engagement directly at all from existing mayors or combined authorities. For example, we've tried a bit abortively to invite a mayor along to speak at our devolution conference in June, and we've had over the last 6 months like not one taker. So I guess that's going off the piece a bit, but if we're talking about principal authorities and the same kind of concepts that Grace has rightly mentioned, isn't that if we're talking then about combined authority priorities for a particular place or for a bigger strategic area, isn't that an even harder ask, because it's almost a sub-regional area, isn't it, spatially?
Yeah, so just a few notes on the principal question, and I'll come on to that. I mean, definitely strongly agree with Grace, that mindset of, and again, just I think some mayors have done this really effectively, both Andy Burnham and Andy Street in their tenure, consistently use the line place over politics. And I think that can be a really powerful mindset to go into any conversation with your principal authority. This isn't political. This is about a particular community or place issue, and just try and take some of the politics out of it would be one point. Just to really strongly agree with what Grace said. I also think, you know, obviously involve your principal authorities. You might want to invite the local councillors to some of your meetings and really approach the issue as a partnership of equals would be my other advice. You know, it's it shouldn't be a hierarchical conversation in my view. It should be, there's a problem to be solved or an opportunity to be seized. You've got some things you can contribute. I've got some things I can contribute. Why don't we get together and think about how we can do this? And I say, building those bridges, inviting your principal authority councillors to be around the table for some of those conversations. You might be really surprised what comes off the back of just building some of that trust and getting a conversation going. You can do that obviously in a public space, but you know, there's a huge role in go for a coffee and get to know someone and put that effort and work into to kind of build some trust with the people you know you're going to need to work with. And then the last point, just to add to that, would be around the officers in councils as well. And I just think never forget, like, as well as the politicians, like there are really hardworking officers in your principal authority that I imagine would be delighted to, you know, if you've got an answer to a problem, they've got to connect with them. There was a scenario in my local area where the principal authority were planting trees. And there was some real angst amongst communities about where they were being planted, because they were being planted very close to homes, and that could cause some kind of issues later down the line. And it sounds like a really granular kind of thing, but the principal authority probably wasted a lot of time, effort and resources having to completely remodel where they plant these trees in my community, rip them up and put them in different places. And I bet that officer was feeling a bit sore in the process. And actually, go to them, offer that, we can help you do this. Don't wait to be asked. Go and make that offer of support. So they're just a few extra dimensions to what Grace said. On the combined authorities question, yeah, I think it's a good one. It's a complex one, which isn't me ducking the question, but I think, as you say, probably in the county combined authorities, which we're starting to see more of, one would imagine there'll be more parishes and towns linked to those geographies. One of my learning points is, think about the people that do have a strong voice around a particular topic or issue. It might be some of your local businesses that actually you could engage early on and work through those actors to get your voice heard in a combined authority setting. Mayors are really keen to get out in the community, so it's that kind of turn it on its head a bit and think, what's in it for them and how could I help them? And so it might be a particular community group, or it might be, say, a particular business on your patch that you could engage with, join forces and work together with them to try and approach your combined authority, your mayor, if that's a scenario. So I think that's one kind of thing to think about, is who are the other people in that space. I think the other one is never to forget, combined authorities have deputy mayors, and I often find they're a bit forgotten about in the combined authority conversations. Not always, because they come from different places and backgrounds, but you'll more often find that they're a councillor at a council, maybe a leader or deputy leader at a council that then is the deputy mayor of the combined authority. You might find a bit more traction with them. You might already have some relationships with that council or that individual, and obviously they can help you get a conversation with the mayor or the combined authority. So yeah, I mean, I say it is a complex one. I think it's something I'm sure NALC will continue to have a strong voice around the role of parishes and towns in that space. But I think there's a bit of think about the people that can deploy that influence you want to achieve and work with them to get your voice heard. Yeah.
Brilliant, thanks, Stephen. I think the point is, I think regarding devolution, there seems to be two types of devolution. We knew anyway, didn't we? Regarding, for example, the kind of macro devolution from central government down to mayors and combined authorities and principal authorities, but then parishes really fit into the whole onward devolution, or as Miliband used to call it, double devolution, and that concept hasn't really gone away. And the concept is there seems to be a disconnect between macro and onward devolution. Which aren't the themes of today's event, but actually, as you both said in your pieces, we can't get away from that, and that's going to be the context for the next 18 months, 2 years, as these new authorities are created. And as you said, Stephen, in the whole kind of sub-regional combined authority, mayoral context, and there simply has to be that connection. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a real schism, a hairline crack between the grassroots, even smaller principal authorities and smaller boroughs and smaller districts that survive, and and parishes vis-a-vis the mayors of combined authorities. So, and nobody wants that. Listen, the final question I think we've just about got time to ask, and it's a brilliant one. It's from Joy Morgan, who is probably asking a question that I think a lot of people want to just get your steer on, which is about smaller parish councils, the type of which I've just mentioned. And I'll ask it to you, Grace, first, because we're going to give it a couple of minutes. Is if you were starting from a zero base on community engagement, for example, in a small parish council, and don't think there is any, how or where, what would you start with? You've both touched on this, I get that, but Grace, if you've got any broad principles or maybe even new local materials or links you can signpost Joy to.
Yeah, so definitely have a look on our website. The blog has a lot of just very practical tips. What I would maybe suggest, and I think this links into what I was speaking to earlier, which is like, this isn't just about discrete events. Something that I think we've seen really powerfully done in a number of councils is where they have really focused on equipping everyone with the skills to have what we'd call like strengths-based conversations, asset-based conversations. So rather than just thinking about specific forums and engagement opportunities, which I think you absolutely should be thinking about, I think there's also something about how councillors feel equipped to have those conversations with people in their community in a strengths-based way, you are engaging with huge numbers of challenges that people are going to be raising, but there's a way to have conversations with people which are really focused on what's strong, what can we build on, where are the opportunities, where is the energy. And I think focusing on how you really have the confidence to have those conversations is a really valuable and powerful point to start good engagement. And back to that, almost starting with and thinking about open conversations first, strong conversations first, and then maybe into some of the set piece engagement pieces. That's maybe where I would go. But I am now going to have to send my apologies to duck off because I need to go speak about participatory budgeting. So on a theme. So it's been really incredibly valuable to speak to all of you. Really welcome the opportunity. Do have a look at New Local's website, and I hope you have a good rest of the conversation in the last part of the session. And thank you.
Fantastic, and thanks to you, Grace, on behalf of Stephen, all the speakers, and the delegates here, of course. Thank you so much. Take care. All the best. Cheers now. Bye bye. Okay, so Grace has just kindly highlighted and enunciated, Stephen, the kind of top tips in terms of the principles of community engagement, where perhaps some smaller parish councils that maybe haven't traditionally engaged culturally on either set piece or other types of community engagement, or may have been doing it anyway, but just not in a way that they would define as community engagement. How do you have any? A lot of these smaller parish councils, I'm guessing, we define them as with budgets of under 25k, don't have a lot of capacity, maybe employ 1 or 2 members of staff, but not more than that, and have a limited budget with which to prioritise, community projects. Any kind of broad steer to them and to Joy?
Yeah, I mean, on that question, I think I would do 2 things personally. I would learn from someone else, as the phrase, so I would think about go and speak to other parish councils that you think might already be doing this and ask them what they did and what they learned. And yeah, 9 times out of 10, someone else has done this before. So that would be my top tip is as I said, 10,000 parishes and towns around the country. I guarantee there'll be some really rich learning from some of your peers in this space, and they'll probably be quite happy to share that learning as well. If you get really stuck, I'm sure, Chris, you could provide some pointers as well. So that would be always my top tip. As Grace said, peer learning is always really powerful. And I think the other one is ask people, it might be when you're doing some street walking or a local meeting or whatever it is you do when you interface with your community, ask the question, what do you think? How do you think we could engage local people more in what we're doing? And I'm sure you'll be surprised about some of the really creative ideas that come forward. So yeah, just to add, learn from someone that's already doing it well, and be quite open. This is new for us, but we want to listen and get ideas from you in our community.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think just to point out from this end, and no doubt it's a point you're aware of as well, what a combined authority or a principal authority or a parish council might define as their community, quote unquote, might be very different. So the advantage we always say about parish councils, town councils, Stephen, is that frankly nobody really does know their immediate place better than they do, or the residents or the clerk or the councillors there, because a principal authority in remote government is only going to get worse. As we see fewer principal authorities, many of them are going to be scrapped this year and next year. And that may create this concept we keep hearing of remote government. So it could be in rural areas, a 40 or 50 mile drive to county hall or whatever. If you end up with a county unitary created in a massive rural area, for example. So it's even more important that parish councils are created, and that, in our view at least, not asking you to comment on it, Stephen, but that parish councils, are created in those areas that don't have them, to make sure that community voice is there to liaise with the principal authority, which is likely to be more often than not now unitary. So whereas a county unitary might define a community based on electoral ward, which might take in 3 or 4 parishes, or in terms of a combined authority, I don't necessarily know what the electoral divisions are there, but even bigger. So I think the need for parish councils is kind of a given from our perspective. But in terms of creation of parish councils, and a reason why they're critical in our view, it's because you know, in a particular place, super output level based on the ONS, whatever you want to call it, nobody knows their place or community better than a parish council, in our view, and that's why more of them should be set up, and they're great things. So I think based on that, anything the LGA can do moving forward to help that conversation go about how within the community engagement space, principal authorities and combined authorities can engage with their parish councils can only be a good thing, and would be much appreciated, Stephen. Let's look to another question now. It's just going 1 o'clock, so we've got about 10 minutes left for Q&A. There was a really good question that Martin Burton asked about 25 minutes ago. It's just been on the top here, and it is a question. It is a question, so we can ask you that one, Stephen. So it's probably one that you pick up across the Be a Councillor team, I guess, or project, in terms of people wondering if they've got the time still to be councillors or to stand for election. How do you get the views of people who are busy with work, families, and just about managing? Well, we all know that feeling, don't we? And don't have time, spare time for meetings, I guess community meetings, and people who feel they're underrepresented in community consultation. How do you recommend, Stephen, that we secure their buy-in? People who are there different means? So there's another question from Hannah about digital, but are there other means we can apply to get their views?
Yeah, I think some of it goes back to that. What are we doing? Are we consulting? Are we co-designing, etc.? And like I say, things like surveys can be really nice, quick ways. I'd probably put myself in that category. Pretty busy, work, personal life, really interested in local democracy and what's happening. Probably haven't got the time to kind of come along to all of the meetings and things. But if a survey comes around, what do you think about X or Y? I'll usually give some time to feedback. So a simple online paper survey, never underestimate the power of that to get lots of views quickly on that. I think the other is, as Grace said, don't be afraid to go to where people might be meeting. So kind of flip it on its head. I don't know, there might be a local sports club, for example, and there might be an opportunity to have a conversation with people that might fit that kind of brief. So think about the environments and the settings where people do convene. Say the other dimension is when you have your meetings. I know it's always a balance, but if you're doing consultation, probably provide something in the evening, lunch, workday and weekend/evenings, and that can often be helpful to have a conversation at different points in the day. And yeah, as you say, Hannah said, I think digital has its place. It's not a panacea at all, but it can be part of a kind of a tool in the toolbox, if that makes sense. And linked to the digital exclusion bit, and one thought I have is, won't be the case for everyone, but never underestimate the power of young people on this front, right? It slightly scares me how digitally competent my nephews are that are 8 or 9. But it might be for mum and dad or for grandma, grandpa, etc. There may be a way of engaging people digitally, but helping, because you might want it to be all age and encourage families of people to think about some of this. So we used to do that a lot in adult learning in some of the councils I did, that kind of, helping adults learn from young people as well as the other way around can be quite helpful on that front. So, and the other one on digital exclusion is not to forget, I know, it's ever more challenging, but where they exist, community libraries do some fantastic work on digital exclusion. They often have really good training programs on the basics of learning. It can be learning how to use digital. It can also be sitting with someone to help them do something, whether it's complete a web form to access a service, or in this case respond to maybe a consultation. So you connect with your local library and some of those community services, appreciating if and where they exist, because those guys are real experts and work really hard on the digital exclusion point.
Fantastic, thanks very much. And I think we would certainly say the same thing. Stephen, it's critical to use as many tools in the box to engage with the community. It depends on the size of the community, like we said. Even within the parish sector, we can be talking about, a village of 150 people, all the way up to, say, Northampton Town Council, which has, I believe, a population in the neighbourhood of 120,000. We're going to see a lot more of those size of town council created, almost, behaving like small municipal authorities in our sector. So actually, engaging with communities is going to be absolutely crucial across a lot of this new government's kind of policy platforms, whether it's new towns being created, for example, as I mentioned to you and Grace at the start, whether it's to do with planning issues, whether it's to do with housing developments. I'm sounding very planning-esque there, but a lot of the issues that do come forward from our sector are to do with planning, I've got to be honest, and housing, but any sorts of other issue, local issue, and just getting people around the table, just keeping it simple, not necessarily worrying that it has to be a particular tool that's applied. We did have one of these events 2 or 3 years ago when one of Grace's predecessors came along and talked about some new local work that was being done in terms of tools for digital, community engagement, which I think factored in a couple of parish council case studies. But it doesn't have to just be digital. I think there's a view as well that that's just one option, as you said, Stephen. And actually, as long as you're in the end getting people's opinions, making a record of them, feeding back to the relevant organisation, who you wanted to use that evidence gathering for, and then making sure that there's a flow back, a golden thread of communication back from that organisation, whether it's principal authority, someone else, combined authority, back to the community and next steps. That's what the whole purpose of that is. One thing I would say is, if there are people here from parish councils specifically, is we've noticed that some councils, whether it's part of local council award scheme, I'm not centrally involved in that, but do have, as Stephen mentioned, community engagement policy or strategy on their website. I think the speakers have confirmed that that's also a good idea anyway to do that, but such that it's not just something that is almost like a tick box done and on your website. To actually apply the contents of that is something which is perhaps more of a challenge, but also in terms of setting the precepts and setting council tax, etc., to take on services from principal authorities, and not combined authorities but principal authorities. If you need to increase the precept to pay for that, when a service or liability's maybe just been dumped on your council, community engagement is crucial to confirm, for example, that Stephen, that the precepts increase, the council tax increase is justified and broadly agreed with by residents, and it can really kick off in the media if that community engagement hasn't happened. So I don't know whether, Stephen, whether you got any comments on that, and then I'll ask you one sort of final question to close.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of links into one of my colleagues with a kind of overarching reflection. I really like Sarah's comment in the chat, by the way, one size doesn't fit all, absolutely. And I think it's like, you're obviously all here because you're keen to got an interest or keen to learn or share experiences, and consultation engagement is hard to do. It takes time, you'll get different opinions and they won't always agree with each other, but generally the effort you put in will pay dividends later down the line. Even if it doesn't get to the outcome or the answer people want, if you've engaged people earnestly, you've told them what you've tried to do, even if you couldn't achieve it, or you've had to go down a different route, even though we appreciate there were very mixed views on this, generally people will be more accepting of a decision or something or an issue if they can recognize someone's tried their best. And I know it sounds really simple, but I think that's the kind of the magic of community engagement. Is it's not always about getting to the right answer. The process creates the value as well as the outcome.
No, I completely understand. And actually, it is, isn't it? It's about getting the right consistent approach to engaging with residents on a raft of different issues. I'd say there are some parish councils, just from a look at the various websites and Googling, that don't actually have community engagement strategies. Our view from the NALCEN would be that councils, where possible, should all have such a strategy, at least so that it can demonstrate that councils have thought about it. But it's even then, I appreciate clerks perhaps only works a few hours a week in some cases, and I know that's the case at what we call micro council level, or really small parish councils. It's a challenge, but in any case, community engagement, every parish council has residents, therefore they form your community, therefore you should be engaging whatever the size of council is, or anyway, So it's something which isn't an ideal. It should be happening anyway. But it's easier, in some areas than perhaps others, or it's more challenging in some council areas than others. Final question for you to finish on then, Stephen, is Patricia has asked a good question here, which is maybe thematically related, and it's to do with the neighbourhood plan. So a neighbourhood plan, of course, you've got to demonstrate community engagement, as you do presumably on stuff like the community right to bid, etc., and some of the Localism Act 2011 stuff that you mentioned before, Stephen. But actually, without being prescriptive here, so Patricia's saying that Wansford, where she's from, has commenced the production of a neighbourhood plan. Engagement is overwhelming. But some of these themes that councils engage with a committee on can be quite dry and other and removed, can't they? So how do you keep people motivated when perhaps the process is either so prescriptive or the subject area quite dry? I mean, do you think you almost have to redouble your efforts or use varied approaches in that scenario?
Yeah, I mean, in local government, I always think this is like where this is not the only thing, but this is the real strength of councillors and politicians as technocrats like me. We can probably work on very technical, dry, very well thought through, but not particularly motivating topics. And I think devolution is a really good example. You ask people, what is devolution? What will it do for me? And I think we're all on a journey in the local government sector to make that as real as possible for local communities. So I'd reflect on what some of the really effective politicians I've had the privilege of working with do, and I think there is that bit about what difference will it make to my life at the end of this, and really start backwards from there. What is the real thing that will create a bit of you're trying to do, and work backwards from there. Don't go the other way around. If we're doing all these things to get to here, this is what we want to do, and therefore this is why we need to do it in this way, and this is what we need to do. So there's something about that kind of creating that vision, that sunny uplands, if you will, about what the benefits will be at the end. And yeah, I say put yourself in the shoes of the people you're working with, and think about what it will mean for them when they leave their door in the morning or whatever it is, and just make it as real and earthy as possible would be one perspective I'd have that on that. And I think linked to that, probably we touched a bit on, I suppose one theme of today is around partnership, isn't it? And about, we're stronger together, we can, where possible, let's work together. So you may have particular community advocates or community groups in your area that might be really, frankly, better messengers for what you're doing than you are, and that's fine. So involve them. If they're trusted and credible with a particular part of your community, then work with them and ask if they can help you to communicate what you're doing and why you're doing it and how people can help. So yeah, they'd be two kind of initial thoughts: is get your outcome clear, be really grounded in what that is, and create a coalition of the willing about what you're doing, and think about who those allies are in your area that can help you with it. Yeah.
No, exactly. I mean, some of what you're describing there describes what some of the larger town councils have done, for example, on climate change. And I would signpost everyone. I know that isn't the theme of today, but towards Frome Town Council over in Somerset, who have just engaged with all sorts of local partners. Okay, it's a climate change theme, but that is a perfect example of exactly what you're talking about. And there's no reason why, Stephen, that can't apply to smaller parish councils as well as medium and larger ones. And indeed, it's what principal authorities do, isn't it? Because there are lots of projects they can't deliver without partnership with a raft of local bodies. So that principle is taken. And I'm going to take that, Stephen, as your kind of like the one thing that you would recommend all sizes of parish council can do. And I know Grace touched on it as well before, to start engaging with the communities meaningfully if it's not something that they would define as already doing. But look, at 13 minutes past 1, I've waffled on too long, and huge thanks, Stephen, to your outstanding piece there, and to Grace in absentia for hers. It just remains for me to say that apropos the slides at the start, a huge thanks to Stephen and Grace for their brilliant, insightful contributions on what is actually quite a tricky topic, because it's a bit kind of it's a bit invisible, isn't it? Because it's something which, yes, councils are probably doing anyway. You'd hope councils are doing at principal authority and parish council level, but isn't always recognised as happening, and perhaps does need to happen, more, especially given some of the challenges facing residents and councils today at all levels. But again, thanks for helping us identify that and pointing with some pointers. What I would now ask delegates to please do is to fill out the feedback form when it appears on your screen just as you leave the event. Our post-event mailing will be going out tomorrow, and it will include the chat. So if any of you have swapped email addresses to contact each other in the way Stephen described to share good practice, that will happen. Also, Stephen's PDF, which you haven't seen, but which contains, I think, some of the links and context, will be attached. Thanks again to CCLA, BHIB, and Blashier for sponsoring today. And do please check out our other online events, the next one of which will be in July, because we've got 2 sold out in-person events for May and June. And for the rest of the year, they're all on our website, going all the way through to next March, a variety of themes. Have a look on our website for that. But otherwise, huge thanks to Stephen and Grace and yourselves for joining in today, and for my able colleague Liv for so brilliantly Zoom hosting the event. Have a great day and a great bank holiday weekend all. Take care. Thank you.